In 1980, the red tractors with the name Massey Ferguson were working fields on every continent on Earth. The company had built some of the most powerful tractors ever to roll off an assembly line, machines pushing past 300, then 375 horsepower, articulated giants that could pull through ground nothing else could touch. It was, by sales volume, one of the largest farm equipment makers in the world. And on October 1st, 1980, it began its fiscal year in default. $2.5 billion owed to 250 banks across 2 countries. Not late on a payment, not in trouble, in default. A company that built machines strong enough to move mountains of earth couldn't move the one that mattered most, the one made entirely of money. A small workshop in Newcastle, Ontario, grew into one of the most powerful names in agriculture and then lost almost all of it in less than a decade. Here's how that happened. The workshop that started with a thresher, Newcastle, Ontario, 1847. In 1847, a man named Daniel Massey opened a small foundry and machine shop in Newcastle, Ontario. Farming in Canada at the time still depended almost entirely on manual labor and horses. Massey built mechanical threshers, machines that separated grain from stalks, work that had taken farm families days of backbreaking labor by hand. His shop was small. His ambitions were not. Massey's son, Hart Almarin Massey, took over the company and renamed it Massey Manufacturing. Under his leadership, the company grew from a regional workshop into one of the most important farm equipment makers in Canada. In 1891, Massey Manufacturing merged with a competing company, A. Harris, Son and Company, to form Massey Harris. The new company became one of the largest agricultural machinery manufacturers in the entire British Empire. By the early 1900s, Massey Harris equipment was working fields across Canada, the United States, and Europe. A small Ontario workshop building threshers by hand had become a multinational manufacturer in less than 60 years. That speed, that hunger to grow faster than almost anyone else in the industry, would define the company for the next century. For better, and eventually, for worse, the Irish engineer's idea, Harry Ferguson, and the 1953 merger, Coventry and Toronto. Harry Ferguson was an Irish engineer who had already changed tractor design forever with his 3-point hitch system, the invention that let a tractor and its implement work as one connected unit. In 1953, Massey Harris merged with Ferguson's company to form Massey Harris Ferguson. On paper, it looked like a perfect match. Massey brought manufacturing scale and a global dealer network. Ferguson brought the engineering that every farmer wanted. In practice, it was a mess. The 2 companies kept separate product lines for years. They kept 2 entirely separate dealer networks, meaning a farmer in the same town might have 2 different dealerships selling what were, underneath the branding, nearly identical tractors. Customers were confused, dealers were frustrated, and the conflict went all the way to the top. In under a year, Harry Ferguson left the company's board entirely in a dispute over the design of a new tractor called the Model 50. The man whose name was now permanently stitched into the company's identity had already walked away from how that company was being run. In 1958, the name was finally shortened to simply Massey Ferguson. The jingle that played on radio and television called it a get up early, keep 'em roamin', Massey Ferguson kind of a man. The brand sounded unified. The company underneath it had been fractured since the day it was formed. The race to build the biggest Massey Ferguson horsepower era, 1960s-1980. Through the 1960s and 1970s, Massey Ferguson chased horsepower the way other companies chased market share. In 1971, the company introduced its first articulated tractors, the MF 1500 and MF 1800, producing 180 and 210 horsepower. Machines that size had barely existed a decade earlier. In 1978, Massey Ferguson became the first manufacturer in the world to introduce an electronic control system for the 3-point hitch, a piece of engineering pride, even as the balance sheet behind it was already cracking. By the late 1970s, The MF 4800 series was producing up to 320 horsepower. And in 1980, the same year, the company would begin defaulting on its debt. Massey Ferguson released the MF 4900, reaching 375 horsepower. It was, by any measure, one of the most powerful production tractors in the world. The engineering teams had delivered exactly what they were asked to deliver, machines that could outwork almost anything else in the field. But horsepower doesn't pay down debt, and the company building the most powerful tractors in its history was at the very same moment running out of money to keep building them. The man who cut to save it, Conrad Black takeover. 1978. By the late 1970s, Massey Ferguson was already in serious trouble. The company's debt-to-equity ratio had climbed to 2.1 by 1978. It reported an operating loss of $34.4 million that same year. The man who took control of the company's direction was Conrad Black, whose family, through the Argus Corporation, had gradually built a controlling stake in Massey Ferguson since the late 1960s. In August 1978, Black became chairman of the company's board. He moved quickly. He replaced the company's longtime president, Albert Sornbrough, who had earned the highest executive salary in Canada just 1 year earlier, with a new president named Victor Rice. Black pushed sweeping cost-cutting programs. He downsized the workforce. He pushed the company to focus on its core products, tractors, combines, and diesel engines, rather than the sprawling global ventures it had taken on in previous decades. For a moment, it looked like discipline might be enough. It wasn't. The debt had already grown, too large for cost-cutting alone to fix. And the man who had taken control to save the company was about to make a decision that would surprise almost everyone watching. The year the bank called the 1980 default. Toronto. By 1980, the numbers had become impossible to cut their way out of. Interest rates had climbed into the high teens and beyond. Massey Ferguson's debt service costs reached 20% by 1979. In just the first 9 months of fiscal 1980, the company paid out $184 million, and interest alone, more than 8% of total sales, gone before a single tractor reached a dealer lot. The company had already stopped paying dividends to shareholders in 1978. Between 1976 and 1980, Massey Ferguson lost 69% of its market value. Only 7% of the company's sales came from its home country of Canada. The rest came from the United States and increasingly volatile markets across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Markets that had once been a strength, now a source of uncertain, unpredictable revenue. On October 1st, 1980, the start of a new fiscal year, Massey Ferguson began the year in default, owing $2.5 billion. It could not pay to 250 financial institutions across 2 countries. The company that had spent 133 years building some of the most respected machines in agriculture was now, by every financial definition, bankrupt. The bailout nobody wanted to give. Ottawa and Queen's Park. 1980. Massey Ferguson's management went to the Canadian government asking for help. It was not a popular request. The company was controlled by Argus Corporation, a conglomerate viewed by many Canadians, including people inside the government itself, with real suspicion. On October 3, 1980, Industry Minister Herb Gray told the press that the federal cabinet had refused to extend aid until Massey Ferguson and its backers provided a detailed refinancing plan. The government wasn't closing the door entirely, but it wasn't writing a check either. Then Conrad Black made a move that surprised almost everyone. He pulled Argus Corporation out of Massey Ferguson entirely, transferring the firm's $23 million of shares directly to the company's own employee pension fund. In public, Black insisted the company was fundamentally sound. "I am violently opposed to any bailout of anything," he told reporters at the time. "We're talking about a company that made money up until 3 months ago. It was a calculated gesture, removing Argus's controversial fingerprints from the company's books, hoping it would make government aid politically easier to approve. It worked, partially. Both the federal government and the government of Ontario eventually stepped in with loan guarantees and assistance, not a full bailout, but enough to keep a 133-year-old company from disappearing completely. In the fall of 1980, it would not be enough to save the company that Massey Ferguson had been. The plant that built 175,000 combines, Brantford, Ontario. 1980s, even as the corporate balance sheet was collapsing, engineers at the Brantford plant were still trying to build the future. A new rotary combine project, the TX900, had been in development since 1976. A second project, the TX800, began in 1980, an entirely new conventional combine line with 4 planned models. But the market they were designing for was disappearing under them. As the 1980s began, American agriculture was consolidating. Fewer farms, but larger ones, buying fewer machines overall. Combined sales across the entire industry in the United States fell from 32,246 units in 1979 to just 8,402 by 1985, a drop of nearly 75% in 6 years. Engineering estimates put continuing development costs for the new combine line at $3.4 million for 1981 alone. The company couldn't justify it. In 1985, both the TX900 and TX800 projects were officially dropped. That same year, a competitor called White Farm Equipment went bankrupt, another casualty of the same farm economy collapse. And the Brantford plant, which had also been building combines for White, lost that business too. After nearly 175,000 conventional combines had rolled down its assembly line since the plant opened, Brantford closed. A facility that had defined Canadian manufacturing excellence for generations went quiet. The name that outlived the company, Verity AGCO, in the present day. In 1986, Massey Ferguson's corporate parent changed its name to Verity Corporation. The Massey Ferguson brand survived, but the company that had carried that name since 1958 no longer existed in the same form. Pieces of the old empire were sold off one at a time. Perkins Engines, the diesel engine maker Massey had purchased back in 1959, was eventually sold to Caterpillar in 1998. In 1994, the Massey Ferguson brand itself was acquired by AGCO, a newer farm equipment holding company. AGCO's own filings describe the deal as acquiring the business from Verity, including its dealer and distributor network. The brand name, the loyalty, the history, absorbed into a larger corporate structure that Massey Ferguson no longer controlled. In the early 2000s, AGCO announced plans tied to closing the historic Coventry plant in England, the same facility where Harry Ferguson's 3-point hitch revolution had once begun, moving production toward other sites. The company that built the most powerful tractors in the world, the company that employed thousands across multiple continents, the company that Conrad Black, the Canadian government, and 250 banks all fought to keep alive in 1980, no longer existed as an independent entity. What remained, in the end, was mostly a name and a red color scheme, kept alive less by any corporate decision than by farmers who held on to their old Massey tractors and kept them running decades after the company itself had been sold, absorbed, and restructured into something else. Under AGCO today, the brand is being rebuilt. New platforms, a flagship 9S series that reaches 425 horsepower, renewed investment in the American market. Whether that counts as the same company coming back or just the same name on a different company's machine depends on who you ask. A workshop in Newcastle, Ontario, became one of the largest farm equipment makers in the world. It built tractors that pushed past 375 horsepower at a time when most machines could barely manage a fraction of that. It employed thousands and put equipment on farms across 6 continents, and it lost almost everything in under a decade. The engineering never failed. The debt did. Debt taken on to chase growth faster than the market could absorb it until it all came due at once. The red tractors are still out there working fields, carrying a badge that outlasted the company that built it. Nobody mentioned that part in the jingle. New stories every week on Deep Furrow.